"Do you have a mate, human?" the orc girl asked me, so I gave her an answer she never expected. An apothecary answered a stranger's question with a joke. Among her people, that joke was a vow. By the time he understood what he had promised, it was already too late to take it back. The shutters had already come off their hinges once that night, and now the drums were closer than they had been an hour before. "Behind me," Sira said, and there was nothing soft left in her voice. "Edwin, behind me, now." He didn't move. "You heard the drums, same as I did." "I heard them," he said. "I'm still not moving." Somewhere past the tree line, torchlight was gathering the way storm clouds gather, slow, then all at once. That came later. This is where it began, on an ordinary afternoon, at a trading counter that smelled of dried yarrow and beeswax. If a story like this is the kind that keeps you up a little past your bedtime, the good kind, go ahead and subscribe to Baba Yaga Universe. There's more where this came from. Edwin Talbot was 44 years old, and he had spent the last 6 of those years running the only apothecary counter for 2 days' ride in either direction. Fenwick Hollow was not a rich town. It was the kind of place where a man mended his own boots twice before buying new ones, where the harvest decided everyone's mood for the season, and where the border with the orc clans of the Greymoss Hills was close enough that most families kept a spear by the door out of habit rather than fear. His wife had died of a wasting fever 4 winters back, in the very room above the shop where he still slept. He had not moved his bed since. He told himself it was practical. The room got the morning light, and the light was good for reading labels, but the truth was simpler and harder to say out loud. Moving the bed would have meant admitting she wasn't coming back to it. He was not an unhappy man exactly. He was a quiet one. He measured out willow bark for aching joints and comfrey for bruises, kept his ledgers neat, and closed the shop at dusk to eat supper alone, same as he had for 4 years running. Of company he had little. Of complaint he had less. He simply got on with it, the way people do when getting on with it is the only option left. It was a gray Thursday in late autumn when the orc woman walked into his shop for the first time, and the little bell over the door rang louder than it had any right to. She had to duck under the doorframe. That alone told him something. Most of the orc traders who came down from the Greymoss Hills were broad but not so tall as this, and she carried herself like someone used to rooms built for smaller people. Her skin held the deep gray-green of the northern clans, and her dark hair was pulled back in a single thick braid worked through with a strip of copper wire, worn and dull from years of handling, not decoration. She set a satchel on his counter. It was plain leather, patched twice, nothing that would catch a thief's eye, except that the stitching along the seams was some of the finest handwork Edwin had ever seen on a piece of traveling gear, small even stitches that spoke of someone who had once had access to a master leatherworker and had since fallen on leaner days. And at the strap's buckle, half worn away, was pressed a small mark he didn't recognize. He noted it the way he noted most things, and said nothing. "I need feverfew," she said, "and whatever you have for lung sickness, a great deal of both." "That's a large order for one person." "It's not for one person." She didn't offer more than that. He filled the order without asking further questions, which was, he would later understand, exactly why she came back 3 days later, and then 3 days after that. Her name, she told him eventually, was Sira. She said it plainly, without hesitation, which made him trust it, though he noticed she never once mentioned a clan, a father, or a home camp, the way most Greymoss traders did within the first 10 minutes of any conversation. A person who left out that much wasn't hiding nothing. She was hiding something specific. He didn't press. In his experience, people told you what they needed to tell you, in their own time, if you simply left the door open and didn't rush them through it. The days that followed fell into an easy shape. She came for herbs, feverfew, willow bark, dried elderberry, the makings of a poultice for weeping wounds, and stayed longer each time than the trading strictly required. He learned that willow bark had been used for pain and fever since long before either of their peoples had written it down. The old healers of both sides had stumbled onto the same truth from opposite ends of the world, which he found, in a quiet way, comforting. It seemed to him that if two peoples could agree on that much without ever meeting, they could probably agree on more, given time. He gave her that fact once offhand, while wrapping a bundle of bark in paper. She looked at him for a long moment afterward, the way a person looks at someone who has just said something more interesting than they meant to. "You like knowing why things work," she said. "Mostly I like things working," he said. "The why comes along for free." She almost smiled, almost. Small kindnesses passed between them, mostly wordless. She fixed the hinge on his back door without being asked, using tools he didn't know he owned. He started setting aside the good chamomile for her, the batch that didn't taste like hay. Once, when an early frost caught his herb-drying racks out in the yard overnight, he found them already brought in and stacked neat under the eave by the time he woke, and Syrah gone before first light, as though she'd never been there at all. Neither of them called any of it courting. It wasn't that, not yet. It was something quieter and slower than that, built the way a wall gets built, one stone set carefully atop the last, with no hurry at all. It was on one of those visits, with the shop empty and the light going gold through the window, that she asked him the question that started all of it. "Do you have a mate, human?" He looked up from the scale he was balancing. The question came so plainly, so without preamble, that his tired mind reached for the easiest thing it had, a joke, the kind he might have made to any customer on any afternoon. "No one's been foolish enough to take that job," he said, and laughed, a short, unthinking sound. Syrah went very still. "You say no one has been foolish enough," she repeated slowly. "That is not the same as saying no." "It's a figure of speech," he said, already sensing the ground shift under him. "Just something my people say. It doesn't mean anything." "Where I come from," she said, "words spoken before witnesses mean everything." She glanced toward the open door, where an old farmer named Corbin stood waiting his turn, close enough to have heard every word. "You have just answered a mating question with a challenge in front of a witness. Among my clan, that opens the trial of binding, whether you intended it or not." Edwin set the scale down carefully, the way a man sets down something that might shatter. "I don't understand your customs. I meant no offense and no challenge. Can I simply take it back?" "You can," she said. "At dawn, before my clan's fire, you would need to say plainly that you do not dare enter the trial, that you withdraw as a coward." Her amber eyes held his without blinking. "Some men could say those words easily. I do not think you are one of them." He said nothing. That was, perhaps, the truest answer he could have given her. The next morning came in gray and cold, mist sitting low over the fields the way it did most autumn dawns in Fenwick Hollow. A fire had already been built at the edge of town, near enough to the Greymoss Trail that both peoples could reach it without much trouble. A loose ring of townsfolk and traveling orc traders had gathered, drawn by the kind of news that moves through a small town faster than smoke. Old Corbin caught Edwin's sleeve as he passed. "Take it back, son. Whatever this is, it isn't worth your neck." Edwin didn't answer him either. He walked into the circle, and across the low flames, Syrah waited. He spoke the words he had turned over all night, in her tongue, however clumsily. He did not call himself a coward. He said instead that his answer had been careless, not cowardly, and that he would rather learn what he had truly promised than pretend he hadn't promised it at all. A murmur moved through the watchers. Syrah studied him for a long time before she finally spoke. 3 days, she said, you will learn the shape of what you agreed to. After that, you may withdraw with your honor whole, or you may enter the trial with open eyes. Choose only once you understand the choosing." Those 3 days changed him more than he expected. He was taken briefly into the edge of the Grey Moss camp, where he learned there were 3 trials any outsider must pass to stand beside a clan daughter. A trial of truth, spoken plainly before fire. A trial of service, where a person's worth was measured not by strength, but by what they were willing to give. And a trial of the stand, where a person showed in the moment that mattered most, whether they would remain or run. It was on the second evening, walking beside the stream that ran behind the trading post, that Sira finally told him the rest of it. "My mother is matriarch of the Grey Moss clan," she said. "The council has already promised me to Thok Bloodhorn. He is strong. He is also the kind of cruel that hides itself well in front of elders and shows itself plainly to everyone beneath him. Under the old law, if I stand mated to one of my own choosing before the first snow, the council's promise is broken." She looked at him directly. "I asked you that question hoping for exactly this, an answer I could use." "So I was a door," he said, "not a person." "You were at first." She held his gaze without flinching from it. "Then I watched you weigh a fair measure for a Grey Moss trader who couldn't have argued if you cheated her. I watched you sit with an old woman for an hour because she was lonelier than she was sick. A door doesn't do those things without being asked." She paused. "I no longer know what you are to me. I only know I would like to find out." He thought of his empty house, and the bed he'd never moved, and the 4 years of getting on with it. "Then let's find out," he said. The trial of truth came first, at a fire built high enough to throw shadows across every watching face. 3 questions asked before witnesses to be answered without softening. "What do you want from me?" And he answered that he want to understand her, not to possess her. "What do you fear?" And he answered that he feared the loneliness she carried more than he feared her strength. And last, "If I had no clan and no name, only a blade and old scars, would you still walk forward?" And he told her that then, perhaps, he would see her most clearly of all. The trial of service came next, and it asked more of him than either of the others. A wasting sickness had moved through the youngest children in the Grey Moss camp, the same kind of fever that had taken his wife, and for 3 days and nights he barely slept, brewing feverfew and willow bark by the gallon, teaching 2 of the clan's healers a poultice technique his own grandmother had taught him. He did not save every child. He saved most of them. Sira found him afterward, gray with exhaustion, and said nothing at all. She simply sat beside him until the sun came up, and that was worth more than any words could have been. It was around this time that the smaller signs began, the kind a careful man notices and a careless one doesn't. A mark scratched into a fence post near the trading road, one Edwin didn't recognize, but that made an old Grey Moss hunter go quiet when he saw it. Then, a few days later, a lone rider on the ridge above the town, gone before anyone could get a clear look, there for no reason a trader would have. Edwin mentioned it to no one but Sira, and her jaw had tightened in a way he hadn't seen before. "Thok," she said, "he does not lose what he considers already his." Thok arrived openly not long after, with 6 warriors at his back, broad as door frames and twice as unfriendly. He looked at Edwin the way a man looks at a debt he intends to collect. "This is the human you've chosen, Sira, a shopkeeper who counts herbs for a living." "He counts herbs for a living," Sira said, "and he has never once lied to me. I cannot say the same of you." Thok's hand went to the axe at his back, and for one long breath, Edwin thought there would be blood spilled right there on the trading post steps. Instead, Thok only laughed, short and humorless, and said the council would settle this properly before witnesses at the final trial, and that when the shopkeeper failed it, the old promise would stand after all. The final trial was to take place at a ring of standing stones at the forest's edge, with the Grey Moss elders present to judge it. It was there, as the sun reached its highest point and the elders began to speak, that the drums started, not ceremonial ones, but war drums coming fast out of the tree line, torches bobbing behind them. Thok had not waited for the council's judgment after all. Behind me, Sira said, blade already in hand. I'm still not moving, Edwin said, and this time he meant something different by it than he had the very first time he'd said those words. He was no warrior, and he'd never claimed otherwise, but he knew the ground around those stones, and he knew, from 3 sleepless nights in the sick camp, exactly which of Thok's men had a limp that would slow him in soft earth. When one of Thok's fighters raised a blade toward Sira's unguarded side, Edwin didn't think, he simply moved, throwing himself into the strike meant for her. The blade caught him across the shoulder instead, and the pain was a bright white nothing, and the last thing he heard before the world tilted sideways was Sira's voice, breaking for the first time since he'd known her. She ended the fight quickly after that. There wasn't much left to argue about once she did. He woke to firelight and the smell of crushed yarrow pressed against his shoulder, and to the sound of the matriarch's voice, Sira's mother, speaking over him to a hushed, gathered crowd. He is not behind her, the older woman said, and her voice carried the way voices do when they are meant to be remembered. He is not beneath her. He stood beside her when the drums came, and he will stand beside her still. That is the whole of the law, and I will not hear it argued twice. Thok was named before the full council that same evening, his warbands early attack a clear breaking of trial law, and stripped of any claim, cast out past the border stones by morning. He was not seen in Greymoss lands again. The wedding, when it came, was a plain affair by most standards, long tables of rough wood on one side, a low ring of stones and a fire on the other, the whole town and half the clan crowded in between. Edwin wore a gray coat he'd mended himself. Before the fire, Sira asked him the same question she'd asked him that first gray afternoon in his shop. "Do you have a mate yet, human?" Before this, he said, no one had been foolish enough to try. It seems, in the end, I found the most foolish person on either side of this border, and I wouldn't trade her for anything. Some of the townsfolk laughed, so did some of the Greymoss warriors. Sira did not laugh, but she smiled small and real, the kind of smile that had taken months to earn and would last the rest of both their lives. Years later, when their grandchildren gathered close and asked how it had all begun, Sira always told the first part the same way, every single time. "I asked him if he had taken a mate yet," she'd say, and Edwin would finish it for her, same as always. And I answered so foolishly, I very nearly married her the next morning.